Welcome to Cut to the Chase, where we talk about compelling legal, regulatory, and public interest information and news. Your host is Greg Goldfarb, an attorney, entrepreneur, investor, and activist.
All right, folks, it's time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. And I brought on Brad Baldridge to discuss a topic that is on the minds of a lot of parents, which is how am I going to pay, not I, but you, how are you going to pay for your children's college education, which has skyrocketed. Brad, you going to help us out today?
Bet I am.
All right. You know, some folks are lucky enough they get an inheritance, and then, you know, they're like, wow, what do I do with this money? I got to pay for my children's, you know, college, and, you know, I don't know what I should take. Yeah, I got crypto, I got cash, I got real estate. What do I do? So Brad, let's get it going. Brad also, by the way, is also a podcast, he hosts a podcast called Taming the High Cost of College. So if you don't get enough info today, you should go to that podcast either way and take a look at the topics and all the shows there. How fun is podcasting? Just out of curiosity. I know we're cut to the chase and we're supposed to cut to the chase, but from one podcaster to the other.
Oh, I love it. It's the old joke, I have the face for podcasting, or I have the face for radio.
Yeah.
They say. So
no, you're hot. You're hot. I'm going to tell you you're hot. All right, let's get going. So parents, they have kids, you know, what do? They wait until the kids are in high school to start thinking about it. Let's go soup to nuts.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess you just touched on an important point, which is there's a difference between early stage planning and late stage planning. So late stage planning is typically where I help families, and it starts in high school typically. Now you can do early stage planning, which is, you know, hey, we're pregnant, or we've got a 2-year-old or a 6-year-old, and college is going to be someday. But typically you're just really talking about setting up some sort of savings or investment plan in order to pay for college at some point in the future, which is a good thing to do. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. But once you get to late stage, now you've got a lot more to do. Now we're looking at visiting colleges, trying to figure out what your student wants to be when they grow up, all the testing, the applications, financial aid, student loans, all those things become much more real, where when the kids are young, all you're really thinking about is, should we set some money aside, or how much are we going to pay for college? So when we shift into late stage, that should start in what I would recommend for a lot of families is freshman, sophomore year of high school, even though for a lot of parents, as we remember it when we did it, maybe we waited till end of junior year or even into senior year before we got too involved with college.
Yeah.
But the rules have changed. And I mean, that's the reality of it. The way the financial aid works and how much more complex it's getting, how much more expensive that it's getting, it really needs to be a focus earlier than what it used to be.
So for a lot of people, this will be the first time that they do it, maybe the second time. You know, there's no book, there's no game plan that you can just read, like, hey, here's what I do. I mean, how do people tackle this in the most holistic way? Is this something that they just cross their fingers, or does planning really help?
Well, planning helps, or can help immensely, because it's such a challenging situation where, again, most families, you know, there's lots of ways to pay for college. You know, there's this saving and investing aspect that we talked about. There's loans, there's scholarships, both from the colleges themselves and outside scholarships like Coca-Cola or Buick or whatever. The parents can actually just pay the bill as it comes along. The students can contribute. But the reality is most families use a combination of a lot of the things I just mentioned. It's not, oh, my kid did great, got a huge scholarship and paid for it all. And usually it's not, oh, as parents, we're just going to write a big fat check. It's some combination in between negotiating with the schools, getting need-based aid, taking some loans, maybe getting some merit aid or scholarships. Student goes to work, perhaps works summers, maybe works while they're in college. And between all of those things, you kind of build a plan.
All right, so let's focus on those families that are, you know, inherit money. Typically it's, you know, their parents die and you get an inheritance, and And,
Right.
it's not exactly the most pleasant conversation. But they're different assets that you can inherit, real estate, money, all that kind of stuff. Is there a different game plan with each one of these types of assets, or does it matter?
Yeah, it definitely matters. So again, if, I guess to kind of lay the groundwork, we need to understand how need-based aid works. So need-based aid is calculated based on a family's income and assets. And your income comes from your taxes. So, and they use you what's called your AGI, which is usually about a line 11. It moves around a little bit depending on the year, but about a line 11, where they take all your various forms of income. So your investments, your W-2 income from work, your small businesses, all the different ways that you could make money, and they add it all together. And that's your adjusted gross income, kind of the big number. And they take that number and they plug it into the financial aid formulas. And then they also plug in your assets. So things like your investments and that type of thing. Now, for a lot of families, your income and your assets are such that you're not going to qualify for aid no matter what you do. But for a lot of families, it can make a big difference as your income goes up. So that's the kind of the baseline is if your income is very low, you're going to qualify for Pell Grants and lots of benefits, say under 60,000 or 70,000 per year. Now we got the middle income families that are kind of stuck in the middle where they earn 70,000 up to say 200,000, where they're not going to get a lot of need-based aid potentially. They might get some, but they're still going to have a pretty substantial bill to pay, especially relative to that income. And then once you get into the 300, 400, 500,000, then you're very unlikely to qualify for aid unless you're going to an expensive school. So for that group in the middle, what happens, and even the lower incomes, so if you receive an inheritance, you have to report that as an asset. So again, just before I got the inheritance, we had 20,000 in the bank and we had 20,000 saved for college, and it didn't have a big impact. Right after the inheritance, well, now I have an extra house that I have to report because grandma and grandpa left the house, and now we have to report another $300,000 or $600,000 as an asset when we file our forms, and that can have a huge impact on the results. And then the other thing that can happen is instead of receiving assets that just count as an asset, you might also receive a retirement plan. Now, the good news is, generally speaking, you do not report your retirement plans when it comes to need-based aid. So most parents who have a pension, profit sharing, 401k, IRAs, all that stuff, you do not need to report it, which is good, and it makes it easier to qualify for most families. The challenge is when you receive grandma and grandpa's 401k or IRA, you're required to take that money out over 10 years. So when you take that money out, you have to pay taxes on it, because when grandma and grandpa earned it, they didn't pay taxes on it. They put it into the retirement plan at work and they still didn't pay taxes on it. Maybe they shifted it to an IRA. They still didn't pay taxes on it. You inherited it, and now you're required to take it out and pay taxes on it, which is, again, it's only fair.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden you say, well, I've got $200,000 in this IRA. When should I take it out? Because it's going to blow up my aid. So I've worked with families that have, a senior in high school that's about to go to college. Then they also have a ninth grader and a seventh grader and a fourth grader. And they're like, well, okay, well, I'm always going to have a kid in college potentially for the next 10 years. How do I figure this out?
Yeah.
What makes the most sense? And so that's one aspect of it, is how does it impact your aid? And then the other impact, of course, is, well, if I'm already earning my normal salary and I have to take money out of, grandpa's IRA, then what? Well, then it's additional income and it's taxed at a higher rate than if we didn't have other income that it was already on top of. So now we get into the overall tax planning as well, where, for some families, if you're relatively close to your own retirement, then maybe you delay liquidating that account until you are retired. But for other families, it's not going to work out very well. And So there's a lot of moving parts and it can get complicated. And that's, part of the reason I'm trying to get out there on podcasts and talk about it a little bit, because most people don't know what to do. And most, advisors and accountants out there aren't real familiar with how need-based aid works. And I've seen some bad advice out there where, again, it's a little more complicated than most people realize.
Yeah. So give me like a differential in terms of someone that does it right versus someone that does it wrong. Give me an example of how big of a mistake is it to just kind of wing it and not really get professional help. I mean, it sounds like we're kind of talking about estate planning and almost like a subset of estate planning.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess the biggest example that I can talk about is I had a student that it was about 6 or 8 years ago now. They were still in high school, and they inherited about $250,000 from grandma, and they actually put it in a trust and they labeled it for college. So now that here's a trust, $250,000 in it to help pay for college, which is great. And grandma's trying to do the right thing. Unfortunately, mom's income wasn't terribly high, and the student chose to go to Northwestern, which is a relatively expensive private school in Chicago area. And it costed at the time at about $75,000 a year. So when they fill out financial aid and they say the student has $300,000, that pretty much disqualified them from aid. So they ended up spending the entire account just about to cover the 4 years of college, which isn't bad, right? I mean, that was grandma's intention, that she helped pay for college.
Yeah.
But what grandma didn't know when she set that up is, had she just given that money to her daughter and said, use this for college if you think that's appropriate, or do something else with it if you'd like, just by switching it from the student to mom, they would have probably received more aid, and that aid would have added up to about $75,000 to $100,000.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Right. So obviously that 75,000 then could have been used to help with grad school. But in that particular case, but unfortunately, the die was cast and there wasn't much we could do to undo it.
All right. So it does sound like the grandparents need to be involved and how they set up their retirement, how they're going to pass on their money for purposes of helping with with the students' tuition and all that, and the aid that they might qualify for. It's not just the parents and the kids.
Right. Yeah. So there's various stages of this situation, right? One is grandma and grandpa want to do the right thing and they're trying to figure it out and plan well, and they certainly should do that. I think the challenge is most attorneys don't understand how need-based aid works and that type of thing. So, you got to make sure you get good information on that side of it. And then there's the other piece of it where, maybe, again, the inheritance is underway. And now a parent is saying, okay, well, I'm about to inherit, my parents' house and an IRA and a 401k or whatever. And maybe they've got a sibling. So now it's like, okay, we have to divide these assets. It might make sense for one of those two inheritors to receive the house and the other one to receive the IRA, or maybe it'd be better to do it the other way around. Sometimes we've got that flexibility. Sometimes we don't. It just depends on how it's written. But what was kind of news to me as I delved into this a little bit further is a lot of times if the beneficiaries can agree and the trustees can agree, and a lot of times the trustees and the beneficiaries are the same people, right? It's not unusual for it to be, the oldest child is in charge of settling the estate for the benefit of the oldest child and their brother or their sister. So they're in charge. I mean, they're both the trustee and the beneficiary. And if they all agree, they can change the rules potentially. Which is good because in a lot of cases, then you can do things like disclaim the assets. So I'll disclaim the house if you disclaim the IRA, and then all of a sudden you just shifted, and theoretically you would do that because everybody wins. They get a better tax situation on one side, and maybe they get a better financial aid situation on the other side. So everybody's happy. Obviously, that would be the goal, and you don't want to, plan on one side at the expense of the other. But a lot of times it's not that. It's just really at the expense of taxes or at the expense of need-based aid or other things where, again, everybody's happy.
All right. So what do you do in the scenario where you do have the elder sibling, the younger sibling, they got the pile of money and all these assets, and it may be not set up in the best way for college tuition, and the siblings are not on the same page.
Right.
What can you
Well,
do?
that's right. That's a challenge, right? So, like I said, people really need to agree. And I think, and we all hear about those stories where, in divorces or in contested inheritance situations where, people spend all their time and effort fighting over it. And in the end, the only people that win are the lawyers.
Yeah.
That's a real possibility in some cases if that's what's going on. More often than not, though, what we're really talking about is, okay, well, if I get half the IRA and I get half the house, then what I want to do is I'll pass that I'll disclaim my IRA, and then that will go to my children. And that turns out to be a better thing. Or maybe grandma and grandpa left the IRA to the children, and if the children disclaim it, it'll go to the parent, and that might be better. And then sometimes we can just say, you know what, based on this trust where we have a lot of authority, which is also very common, right? A lot of parents and grandparents and so forth, they just give things like powers of appointment, which allows the person to change the terms within reason, right? They're not trying to make it trying to be difficult, but most, the attorneys understand that, but the general public does not understand. Well, wait a minute, if I want to change this, I can. It says I'm supposed to use it for college, but this other language over here, it says I can change it and say I don't want to use it for college, and I'll use it for a house instead. A lot of times you can't, you have the right to change it. You just have to understand how it works. And then you have to understand, okay, well, if I do it this way, I'll save on taxes or I'll save on need-based aid. If I do it that way, I won't save. Well, obviously I'll do the one that's better. But it's a lot of math, and it's a challenge to understand, well, will I qualify for need-based aid? Will I qualify for merit aid? How much, again, some of the most expensive schools are 70, 80, 90,000 per year now.
Yeah.
But your local state schools generally are not that much. Your in-state state school averages 28,000. So sometimes just the type of schools that your students are looking at may change how you want to plan because of, again, how the whole process works. So there's a lot of moving parts. So, understanding where the family is, what is the income and assets of the family, what schools are on the list, where are we in the process? Do you have kids in high school that are about to go to college, or do you have a sophomore already in college where you're wrapping things up already or relatively soon? That can make a difference. But kind of assessing all those things and then building a plan from there. Now, there's a little bit of urgency because you have 9 months from the date of death in order to disclaim some of the assets and perhaps change things. So if you can meet those deadlines, that would be ideal if you need to, right? Sometimes the plan is it's good the way it is.
Yeah.
Just roll with it. Sometimes the plan is, oh, if we could change things, we should. And getting that all worked out while you're dealing with kids in high school and kids in college can be a challenge for many families.
All right. So it sounds like the folks that inherit, assets, money and all that, need to really pay attention, in terms of timing, if they're gonna, shift things around, and how they're going to use that money. What about families that don't inherit money, but they are in that middle income group that you talked about, or a high, or even the low? Are you able to help those, or are they just basically set in stone? There's really nothing you can do.
Oh, no. I mean, everybody should be doing college planning. Again, I'm biased, of course,
Yeah.
because that's what I do for a living. But, you know, most of the time I can save a lot more than I cost, as an example. And I can kind of take some of that pressure off the family, where for a lot of families, they just don't know what they don't know. They're nervous. They don't, they're seeing big numbers. They don't know how the process is going to go. So there's kind of that side of it where it's just a challenge from I've got to fill out all these forms. I got to understand all this stuff. I got to find the schools that are a good fit. And can we really afford a private school? Or I've heard private schools don't necessarily cost as much as they say, and all that kind of stuff. So kind of getting to the reality of what's appropriate for your family. That's one step. And the other step is how you're going to pay for it all. And most families either are going to do it well or they're not going to do it well. But I've not seen a lot of families say, well, college is canceled because we can't figure it out.
Yeah.
Almost no parent's going to do that. What's going to happen is they're going to plan poorly. And then at the very end, they're going to say, well, this didn't work out real well. I guess we'll sign up for that ugly loan because we're not willing to cancel college. And that's where we hear about, again, students being in major debt because they didn't understand what they were getting into. Maybe they missed opportunities with scholarships or need-based aid or all the other strategies. And then again, sometimes people just don't know that the colleges that they're pursuing are likely to be expensive. So we can plan ahead. We can really understand earlier in the process what those colleges, not only what their list price is, but what it will actually cost for you by predicting what the scholarships will be, by predicting what the aid that might come through. And again, sometimes we can get it very close. Sometimes maybe we're guessing a little bit, but it's a process that we can go through. The analogy I like to use is like going car shopping, except that at some car dealers, you might get a 50% off coupon. You just don't know which car dealers until you visit them and get into the process and really learn how it works. So now, people are wandering from dealership to dealership trying to figure it all out. And they're always in the back of their mind, they're always nervous. Well, am I overpaying for this? Could I have gone elsewhere and gotten a better deal? The BMW dealership, a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to go there. I hear those are expensive. So wait a minute, but if I get 50% off, maybe I can get that fancy car for the price of a Chevy.
Not that there's anything wrong with a Chevy.
Right, exactly. But obviously there is a price difference in it. And
Yeah.
that argument is very valid when it comes to college.
Yes.
Right? Some colleges that cost twice what other colleges cost. Are they twice as good? Some would argue yes, many would argue no. And what really is the important part in my book is finding the college that's a good fit for your student where they are and what they're trying to do. And a lot of times it will be the expensive school, but not always. Sometimes it'll be a lower cost school. Or there's many schools, kind of a spectrum, and saying, well, a lot of these schools will work. And we'll figure out which one we like at a reasonable price.
Yeah. Now, I grew up, my mother was a college guidance counselor when I was in high school. So almost every single night we talked about I think I heard about every university. So for a little while, I knew too much about all the universities. But when I was growing up, it didn't really seem like people were hyper fixated on, oh my God, I took a student loan out. How am I going to pay this back? Wow, the school was horrible. I didn't get anything out of it. Look at the size of the loan. And now I want to go and I want to work for the Peace Corps or what? Do you help people with the taking of the loans out? Are there major differences between the loans? Or are you basically stuck with one loan and that's it? Take it or leave it.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to loans, there is a bit of a challenge. So there's three main categories of loans. So you've got the direct loan, which is a loan to the student. You've got a parent plus loan, which is a loan to the parent. And then you have private loans where you go to the bank or you go to SoFi or you go to these big companies. And there it could be a loan to the student co-signed by the parent, or a loan to the parent without the student on it. So there's choices. And each of them have their pluses and minuses. The two federal loans, the direct loan and the Parent Plus loan, the interest rates are reasonable, but not fantastic. So if you have great credit, you might be able to go to the private market and beat those interest rates. But also it's the loan to the student, especially, is capped. All right. The most that a student can borrow is $5,500 as a freshman.
Yeah.
So if they're going to a school that costs 40,000, they can borrow 5,500 and we're still short a whole bunch. So now mom and dad can either borrow the difference, or pay for it however they want, right? I mean, if they have savings and that kind of stuff, but they could borrow the difference on a plus loan, or they could co-sign a loan with the student. But the whole idea that a student owes $100,000 after college is over is not entirely true, because a parent was there co-signing in most of those situations, which means it's kind of up to the parents to be the adult in the room. A typical 17, 18-year-old may not understand what they're getting into when they see those loans, but the parent needs to be the one that is in charge and pays attention and says, maybe we should have second thoughts about signing up for that much loan. Maybe there's another path or another school or whatever it might be. But I mean, when you hear about those stories of someone owing 100 or 200 or 300,000, a lot of times they went to grad school, they, became a doctor or a lawyer or got their master's degree or whatever it might be. And again, there's got to be a little bit of buyer beware of, their loans are there to help some, but they can be abused.
Yeah. All right. What about scholarships? So I got two kids. One of them is brilliant. One of them is not so brilliant. Can you help me figure out what scholarships, if anything, my brilliant child and my not so brilliant child might try to qualify for?
Absolutely. Right. So when it comes to scholarships, on my website, we've got the scholarship guide for busy parents, which is a great resource that kind of walks you through these different options. But basically what we're talking about is there's the scholarships from the colleges themselves. So they offer need-based aid, they offer merit aid. As an example, Stanford, if your income is under $100,000, they will give you a scholarship that will cover the entire cost. They'll cover all of tuition and all of room and board.
Wow.
If your income is between 100,000 and 150,000, they'll cover tuition for sure and maybe partial on room and board. And then once you're above 150,000 as a family, there's no guarantees. They'll still be generous. I mean, they're still likely to be generous at 150 and even 200 and 250 relative to other schools, but there's still going to be a big price tag potentially.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't realize that. And they say things like, well, Stanford's expensive, we can't apply there. And it's like, well, actually for you, it's not expensive at all. For you, it would be almost free in your situation. The challenge is getting accepted to Stanford, right? They're hyper selective.
Yeah.
Well, only rock stars, academic rock stars are going to get accepted. So, but if you have the shot at it, don't let the price scare you away. So if you're talking about that brilliant, you got two kids, one's brilliant. Are they Stanford brilliant? Well, then maybe they should be going after Stanford or Harvard or some of the high-end schools, or maybe there's a tier below that where they get a lot of merit aid, or maybe they go to the local state school. How competitive is it to get into the flagship? University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin, University of Illinois have great reputations.
University of Virginia,
Texas, University of Florida, University of, I mean, there's lots of state schools that are really good.
Yeah.
Now they may not be a good fit. That's the challenge that I see a lot of families have, is that, well, those big state schools aren't a good fit for us. Okay, well then maybe we do have to look around. But those are, those flagships can be competitive, and a lot of families are going to say, well, yeah, that's our flagship, we can't get accepted, or we're in a state where the flagship doesn't have the majors we need, or there's lots of reasons why we wouldn't pick it. But again, just to understand kind of that process. So finding the school that is willing to offer your student money. Another great example would be if you have a student that can get accepted at Notre Dame or some of these high-end schools, they could go to, say, Marquette or Loyola or any number of schools and be a really strong student and get a $30,000 scholarship, let's say. And that same student could go to a quote unquote lesser school, in air quotes there, and actually just not highly ranked, but not necessarily, still a great education potentially. And they might be free. They might be the dean scholar or the presidential scholar or whoever it is that, pays zero tuition because they win that big scholarship.
Yeah, nice.
But a lot of parents and a lot of students are saying, well, if I've worked hard enough to get into Notre Dame, I don't want to go to that school that accepts everybody. But for some, maybe it's a great fit. So it's just that finding that balance.
Yeah. And don't forget about University of Virginia, my alma mater. Excellent.
There you go.
School.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, probably 25 or 30 of the states have pretty strong state schools.
Yeah. And I remember
very strong.
When I went, I think the tuition was $6,000 when I for some reason, so hearing things are like $75,000, $80,000, it's just kind of mind boggling. All right, let's talk about 529s. Did I get that right? Is that the vehicle that people can invest money, income, get some kind of tax benefits? Is that a no-brainer? I mean, should you every year be maxing out your 529 if you are thinking of having children, have children?
Yeah. I mean, they're good. They're not the only game in town. And I think that's the challenge, right? Is balancing, how much money to put in there and if you can afford to save and how much you're going to be spending on college and those things. But yes, 529s are often part of the plan. Usually we pair them with, outside money as well, because you can't pay for everything out of the 529s. You can't pay for travel. You can't pay for personal expenses. And on top of that, especially when the kids are young, people are a little nervous about, well, if I put this in for college and they don't go, then what? So balancing those rules, because there's taxes and penalties if you take it out for things other than college.
Yeah.
But once we get to the late stage, and again, you got a kid that's a sophomore in high school, it's now getting relatively clear for most families that college is in the future or is not. And then you can kind of ramp things up if you need to. So it's not unusual as part of the planning that I'm doing to say, oh, we need to put $2,000 a month towards college now, or $3,000 or $4,000, just depending on, or sometimes big numbers, sometimes not quite so big, and 80% of that is going to go into the 529 and a little bit is going to go into Roth IRA or go into some other option, bank account, whatever it might be. So yeah, for many families, they are a good thing, but be sure you're aware of the costs and the downside and the penalties if you don't use them for college, because that can be a relatively big negative if plans go the wrong way.
All right, circling back to one of the things you said initially with the grandparents that have retirement accounts and they're going to pass them on, and you got to take distributions for 10 years, pay taxes and all that. What if they have a Roth IRA? Do they still have that 10-year? And what I'm getting at is if you're grandparents and you're going to be passing on money and you've got a regular traditional IRA, does it maybe make sense to convert to the Roth? You pay the taxes and then the children just get the money and they don't have to worry about the taxes.
So yes, that certainly can be true. It depends on what tax brackets grandma and grandpa are in compared to the kids. It can also be that maybe the kids have the lower tax bracket. Now, there's another challenge when it comes to financial aid, because one of the things they pull off your tax return when they're figuring it out is tax-free income. And one of the things that they will actually add in is distributions from a Roth IRA. So unfortunately, whether you receive an IRA or a Roth IRA, for financial aid purposes, they both can have an impact,
Gotcha. Yeah.
which most people wouldn't know. So a lot of financial advisors would probably get that wrong as an example. But it's all part of the plan for sure, right? Grandma and grandpa could have 529 as well. It wouldn't be unusual,
Yeah.
as I'm working with grandparents these days, that they're saying, well, we want to have, we want to give $10,000 to each grandkid now and put it into something for their college. And, for some of them, they're going to use it in a couple of years, and some of them are 10 years away, let's say. And they might say, well, we'll put $10,000 into 6 accounts and we'll use 529s for it because it grows tax deferred. And when we spend it on college, it's tax free. And grandma or grandpa owns it for now, but if something, it can pass to the next generation when they're gone. So that might be an efficient way to set up planning and avoid some taxes and all that type of thing as well. So 529s can work for parents, they can work for grandparents, and they can, even work for the student theoretically. If a student did inherit grandpa's house, let's say, they could sell the house, buy the 529, if that made sense.
Yeah. All right. So some parents, they're having kids, they're very organized, they're thinking ahead. Maybe they're listening to this show. Is the best thing to do to hire you the earlier the better? I mean, I know we kind of touched on this, but I just want to kind of clarify that.
Yeah. I mean, so most of my work, like I said, is the late stage planning. So once you have kids that are, freshman, sophomore, junior, that's when I tend to do my best work. I can help families set up savings plans and that type of thing. But what I find is there's a lot less urgency in that, and a lot of times it doesn't happen. But once we have parents of sophomores and juniors and seniors that are saying, well, college is here, we really got to get our ducks in a row. That's when the planning really kicks in. And a vast majority of what I do is parents of high school kids, or even kind of a mix. Maybe they have one in college and one in high school, and now they have an inheritance and they're trying to figure it out. Or again, and that inheritance certainly isn't required. Maybe they just have, I've had parents of triplets, so, triplet sophomores saying college is coming and and we're feeling overwhelmed already. And, they just need help on the financial side. So there's lots of, but earlier than you realize, I think, for a lot of families.
Gotcha. All right. So you mentioned your website has some information on scholarships, and I would imagine it has other resources. How does one find your website?
Yeah. So we're at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. And we've got scholarship guide for busy parents, which is what we mentioned earlier. There's also a financial aid calculator. There's cost of colleges by state, so you can look up some numbers and learn more about that. There's actually a resources tab right there where all kinds of great information. And then if you have questions or you want to reach out, there's a phone number there. If you call during business hours, someone will actually answer the phone.
Nice.
And there's also, you can send us an email. You can go on there and sign up for an appointment electronically if that's your thing. But yeah, so everything is there at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com, as well as the podcast.
All right. So that is the best way to get in contact with you. Go to the website and you'll be able to figure it out. All right. Is there anything I missed that you wanted to touch? I mean, this is not my forte, college financial planning and all that. So I want to make sure that if there was a topic or some issue that you wanted me to bring up that I didn't bring up, this is your chance.
Yeah, no, I think we were pretty comprehensive. College planning is, you can always do more. And I think that's the challenge, right? How much time and effort do you want to allocate it? I always, the analogy there is, well, you pay for college in a number of different ways. You pay for it with money, you pay for it with time, you pay for it with stress. And for a lot of families, it's just a busy, stressful time on the student side because they have to apply and find the schools and figure out what they want to be when they grow up. And that can be stressful. from that side of it, as well as then on the parent side, how are we going to pay for it? Are we going to get, what kind of aid will we receive? So I think that's kind of that balancing act of, the student should have, fantastic test scores, and they should do a whole bunch of scholarship applications, and they should apply to 20 schools, and they should. And the reality of it is you can't do it all. You got to find some happy medium. Now, some kids will apply to 20 schools, and some kids will do a whole bunch of scholarship applications.
Yeah.
But you kind of need to know where the limits are, not for what other kids do, but for what your students are going to do.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that matter in your situation.
Gotcha. All right. I think that's going to do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase with Brad Baldridge, Taming the High Cost of College. Listen, folks, I know a lot of people like, we need to we need to have some financial planning. Well, sometimes part of the planning is how are you going to spend your money, and how are you going to spend it wisely on your children and their education or whatever. So, it's like building a house. You build a house, you don't know what you're getting into. You're paying for college. You don't know you got to call people like Brad and let him guide you. He will save you money, time, and effort, and produce a much better result than if you do it on your own. I can pretty much guarantee you that. All right. So Brian, thank you for showing up today. And from one podcaster to the next, to the other podcaster, let's keep podcasting. All right. That'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. Brian, you take care of yourself. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Disclosures. The information provided to you today is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be specific recommendations or advice. Please consult with a qualified professional before acting on any of this material. Investing involves risk. Depending on the types of investments, there may be varying degrees of risk. Investors should be prepared to bear loss, including total loss of principal. 529 College Savings Plan Disclosures. Investors should carefully consider investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. This information and other important information are contained in the fund prospectuses, summary prospectuses, and the 529 product program description. These documents can be obtained from a financial professional or directly from the plan's website. Please read them carefully before investing. Depending on your state of residence, there may be an in-state plan that offers tax and other benefits, which may include financial aid, scholarship funds, and protection from creditors. Before investing in any state's 529 plan, investors should consult a tax professional. If withdrawals from 529 plans are used for purposes other than qualified education, the withdrawal could be subject to a 10% federal tax penalty, state penalties, federal income tax, and state income tax. Brad Baldridge's disclosures. Brad Baldridge is a registered representative with Cambridge Investment Research, Incorporated. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research, Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad Baldridge is also an investment advisor representative with Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions are affiliated. Cambridge and the Baldridge companies are not affiliated. The registered branch location is 2810 South Calhoun Road, New Berlin, Wisconsin, 53151.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.